Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello and welcome back to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm your host, Amelia Fruby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio. And here on this show, I am your fellow traveler and guide on this journey of doing business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty, and hopefully some fun along the way. We are currently in season 6 of the podcast. And if you have been around the block with me, if you have joined us for our 90-something episodes, or even just some episodes, you probably know by now that I talk to a lot of business owners who leave social media. And quite often, I will talk to folks very soon after they've left social media. There's this thing that happens where people listen to the show, they get very inspired and galvanized to take action. They take that action and they email me and they're like, Amelia, I left social media. Can we talk about it? And I'm like, yes, I would love to. I love getting these emails. Please keep sending them my way. I really appreciate them. And also, I have noticed that there's this kind of euphoric arc of that, where when you get off, you experience a lot of feelings. And I have folks on the show who are like, I'm so glad I left and it was so amazing and I can't wait to see what happens for my business. And today we have a guest on the show who went through that journey and then also afterwards had a tough year in business. And I'm really excited to have her with us because I think that it's important to not only showcase the euphoric feelings that come with stepping away from social, but also the very clear and present realities of those decisions, including how to stay committed to what's right for you, even when things get hard. Because I don't have to tell any of you listening that this is a hard year. 2025 has been a tough year, just broadly, nationally, globally, in addition to many folks in business. And I want to offer all of us resources, reflections, conversations about how we're navigating that without social media. So today I am joined by Leah Kern, who is a former client, friend, peer, colleague at this point of mine. I'm so thrilled to have her on. And our conversation is going to have 2 parts. So in the first part of this episode, we're going to walk through Leah's business journey and journey onto and off of social media, and then what happened after she left. And then in the second half of the conversation, we're going to pivot and we're going to talk about something really specific, in the content of Leah's work, because Leah is an anti-diet dietitian, and both of us have stories and experiences to share around how breaking up with diet culture, how connecting with our intuition through intuitive eating actually helped us make the decision to leave social media. So we're going to get into that in the second half of the conversation. If that's not something you feel good hearing about today, it will be cued. You'll have an invitation to kind of step back. But I'm guessing for a lot of you, that might actually make you lean in and feel even more intrigued. How could our bodies lead us to make this decision? How could our values lead us to make these decisions? And I can't wait to dive in to that. But now that I've told you everything that's coming up, let me introduce Leah and we'll dive in. So Leah Kern is an anti-diet dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor who helps people make peace with food and body using the health at every size and intuitive eating frameworks. After graduating from UVM and earning her RDN, Leah built a thriving private practice, doing the exact work she feels she was put on this earth to do. Leah believes that the work involved with unraveling years of conditioning and diet culture and learning to come home to one's body is deeply spiritual, and she treats it as such. She currently lives in Northern California with her partner and their 2 kitties. Hi, Leah. Welcome to Off the Grid.
Hi, Amelia. I'm so excited to be here and with you and one of your kitties.
I know. I am also thrilled to be here. And for listeners at home, my cat Wilco has joined us, as she often does make herself known on my podcast recordings. So, Leah, I've already kind of queued up for listeners a bit about your journey with social media, but I'd love if you could just kind of take us in and tell us a little bit about how you started your business and how you initially grew it on social media for the first few years.
Yeah, it's fun to even think back, and thank you for asking that question. It's a good invitation. So, I started my business in 2019, 2020, and as a dietitian, we didn't get a lot of education about starting a business. I have a bachelor's of science in nutrition and dietetics and food science. And so there was a woman who I found on Instagram who is a dietitian business coach specifically for dietitians who want to start private practices. And she's awesome. And I learned so much from her. And her model was very much you use Instagram as the free marketing tool that it is. And that's how you get started. And that at the time was really helpful in so many ways. And the sort of less obvious way that I think it was helpful was even if nobody was watching, like in the beginning, it made me have to figure out what I'm saying, who I'm talking to. It like she really encouraged getting on stories like face to camera and speaking. And that made me have to step into this sort of authority position or like a leadership role of like, I know some stuff about this topic and I'm going to tell you about it. And I think that was really important for me. And it's crazy. I remember watching some of those old videos that would come up in the archives, and I look like a scared baby. It was like, like my voice was softer and I was like less sure. And then right before I left Instagram, like I could get on stories and be like, hey, like, just like such a calm confidence about it. And that was kind of a cool like video diary journal of how I grew as a person, as a business owner, as a dietitian through that experience. But yeah, essentially, I was encouraged to show up consistently, to share posts, to share on stories. And I did that for about 3 years consistently. And it worked, I started to get people messaging me being like, "Oh my god, it's like you're in my head. This is resonating so much." And then once I built a offering, which at first I didn't have one, I just was kind of building an audience and some, I guess you could call it a body of work, even though is Instagram a body of work? At the time, that's what it was serving as. And then I opened the doors one day eventually and was like, I built this one-to-one offering, do you want to join? And that's how I got my first few clients. And in the beginning, it was a lot of people who probably came over like from some connection to me from my personal life. I think my first ever client was someone I knew from like the Jewish summer camp I went to, but still they were a person who paid full price. Like we had that, extra layer that probably helped them build trust with me. I think my second client was like a friend of a friend. My third client, I think we went to the same college, though we didn't know each other there. So there were like these connections that were an added layer. They weren't quite like random people from social media who found me through a hashtag or something like that. But that then, as the years went on, that did start happening. And to me, that felt like a next level kind of use of social media of like, whoa, I'm really kind of magnetizing people from the internet who I do not know, and they're finding my work. So yeah, it was a main source of marketing for me in those beginning years.
I really appreciate you sharing this because something I'm trying to do a lot more on the show this season is focus on what did work or does work on social media in order to talk about like the necessity of recognizing that and kind of actively grieving it and letting it go if we're really going to make this decision to leave. I think that that matters. And I've had some guests on already this season who are still on social media and thinking in those ways. I'm also hearing in what you're saying something that really parallels my own journey with Instagram specifically of, you had all these loose in-person connections, people from different times in your life. But on Instagram, you're able to build a brand around what it is that you do in a way that is weird and hard if you're just trying to do it IRL, right? Like you don't just like call up all your old friends and give them an elevator pitch. But if they're following you on Instagram, they can kind of clue into your elevator pitch and like the what you're doing and the content. I can remember so clearly for myself, like the year where I moved from just having like a personal account that my friends followed to being a content creator and building a brand on Instagram. And, some of my closest friends unfollowed me because they were like, I love you and this is not for me. And that's fine. But I do see that value and kind of giving you this brand building space. And I loved what you said around how it basically helps you get really good at visibility and messaging in a pretty safe, low stakes space that you just got to practice over and over and over again. That's invaluable.
That looking back feels like probably the biggest takeaway, even though like I got clients and like they paid me sums of money that were enough to be my income, like that seems like the biggest takeaway. But when I look back and think about the greatest hurdle to starting a business for me, and I think for a lot of female identifying folks and just people in general, is a lot of the mindset stuff of like getting over this idea that like I'm too young, or like who wants to listen to me, like little old me. And that helped me work through finding my voice, finding confidence. And I was young. I started my business young. And so I did have a lot of that chatter in my head. And still, I have a credible degree. Like I was a registered dietitian. I am a registered dietitian. So when I speak to the woman who I did business coaching with early on and like share with her like kind of where I'm at now with social media, the one thing she says is like, she's super supportive and stuff. Her feeling is, even if the algorithm's screwed and like social media is defunct and all this stuff, it is still this place where you can practice showing up consistently, working through the jumble of thoughts in your head and try and get them out to words. For most people don't have a podcast, but they will get on stories and chat through an idea. So it sort of makes you flex that muscle of making your ideas concrete, and that's still worthwhile. Like, and I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that that's important. And I think for anyone tuning in who's like, oh, I need to do that, but I don't want to get on social media, here are my immediate ideas for other ways you can do that. So you can absolutely do that in a newsletter. You can start your own newsletter if you like writing. You can be writing a weekly newsletter as a way of like figuring out what exactly is it you want to say. You could definitely have a little podcast. I would keep it super low key DIY. I wouldn't be like investing a ton of money in production when you're just figuring out what you have to say. But I always think of and remember and shout out to my friend, Taylor Elise Morrison. Her first show was called B School, BE School. And she did an episode like every day for a year. And they were tiny, super short. But really that show built such a great body of work that she ended up building a whole company and like a book deal and all these other things from. Like it evolved out of that because that was her way of doing exactly what you're talking about, Leah. It's like putting things out there, getting feedback, having people who like tune in or have things to say or want to chime in on the conversation. So there are ways to do this without social media, but I 100% hear you that like, especially during like the late 2010s, even leading into early 2020s, social media was such a great place to just like try it out and like see if you could talk about things. And also like a really quick way to almost like A/B test your messaging of like, oh, people loved this and they didn't love that. Okay, good information for me. And that can help you develop your first offering or like move toward programs because you're getting that feedback so quickly.
And at the time, I absolutely did not have this perspective. I was like, how many views is it getting? Is this leading to applications? It's only through, hindsight where I'm really able to see, wow, the thing that I thought it was doing for me, which is like getting me clients, which it was, it turns out wasn't even maybe the most valuable part. I do think the most valuable part was like stepping into my identity as a dietitian and authority. And yeah, I do feel like I remember having this moment early on where I was like, I have so many ideas, but it feels so overwhelming to communicate them. And it's because it like so many things you have to practice. And that did get easier. And now I have a podcast and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a real skill I've honed. But I don't know that I would like necessarily say that makes it worth it. Like you said, there's other ways to practice communicating your ideas. And even in the work that I do in sessions with clients, like sometimes you're thinking through a metaphor and you kind of try it with a client and see if it lands. Like it doesn't have to even be like public necessarily.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we can think through things together. I also think that like joining communities and having to introduce yourself to people can be a great way to do this as well. So how do we go from your first few years where you're like practicing and sharing on Instagram, you're growing your audience there. You go from that just being clients who kind of already knew you to like people discovering you through Instagram and getting clients there. Like, how do we go from that to you deciding to leave Instagram, a year ago now? Like, tell me about that shift in your journey.
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I feel so, like, tingly in my body thinking about it, and just that I feel really seen, like, it's such a specific thing that I feel like you more than anyone understand, so just nice to share with you and to think about it. So, I wrote this piece. I have a Substack where I share personal writing, and I talk about it's called "Why I'm Leaving Instagram." I'll send you the link so people can read it if they want, and I talk about it in through the metaphor of, like, breadcrumbs. Like, there are these breadcrumbs that I look back on and, like, they were leading me to the decision to leave Instagram. And the first breadcrumb is, and maybe there were more. This is the first one that jumps out at me. So every summer, I take a month off of work, which has been awesome that I've been able to do, and I go on a long distance hiking trip. I'm obsessed with the Appalachian Trail, and my friends and I are working on, like, doing the whole thing in sections. And so a few summers ago, I think it was 2021, we were in New Hampshire doing a section of the trail. And, you obviously aren't on your phone, you're in the woods. And I would say to my audience, okay, I'm logging off for a month, I'm doing this thing, whatever. And then I'd come back and it would be like this like fun thing to share about and whatever. And I just remember when I logged back onto Instagram after not being on for a month, and not only not being on for a month, but having like a really transformative experience, like being in the woods with two of my best pals and just doing this really awesome thing. My immediate reaction was actually my eyes were like, whoa, like it was hard for them to focus on the little screen because I had been looking at like vast mountains for a month, you know, and I wasn't like looking at anything that close up. It was like looking for, the next blaze in the trees or like looking for the sign ahead or just like looking out into these amazing views. And so then I was just like, whoa, like I don't know what really to make of that other than it felt notable. And then I remember kind of feeling like I I don't really want to go back to this thing, but I guess I have to. It's part of my job. And things felt like silly, kind of like I was scrolling past in my feed and I just felt like disconnected from it in a way that I hadn't felt before. And I really remember just scrolling my feed, seeing like a video of someone eating, a video of another dietitian friend who got engaged and is like doing a surprise face, holding up her hand. And I'm just like, it all seems so silly, like with the perspective of being in the woods for a month. And then I was like, oh, but I have to do this, and sort of like lost touch with that feeling of kind of like absurdity until, later breadcrumbs would come along, and I won't take us through all of them, but a big shift for me was when the tides sort of turned in the favor of like reels on Instagram. And then there was this moment of like reels really became about like using B-roll footage from your life, at least that in my experience of what I saw. So like, you're just on a walk or like you're brushing your teeth and there's this like powerful quote of you just, while you're in the background doing sort of like a mundane human behavior. And so I felt myself kind of having to like shift with that. You have to shift to stay relevant. And then I had this folder on my phone that was literally like called like B-roll footage. And I just had a moment of being like, this is weird. Like, it's weird for me to be recording. And maybe this isn't a judgment on other people. It felt weird for me to be recording myself tying my shoe before I went on a walk and then like walking in the woods, but then having to like walk back to get my phone because I just walked away from it. Like, it just felt so performative and strange and at odds with the work that I was doing, which is about like being present in your life and specifically the lens of, food. So like when I really started to record myself eating a lot, I was like, no, this is taking away the joy of eating that I work so hard to have in breaking up with diet culture. And we'll get more into that in the second half. So the things really started to shift when I was using a lot of like B-roll footage from my life, it just felt performative. It felt weird and it didn't feel right. I felt like the more personal stuff I would share, the more I'd share my partner, the more engagement it would get. And that just felt wrong. Like I didn't want to be doing that, but I felt like I had to. And then I found you. And then I found you. And it's true though. It's true. Like I can ask, so those two best friends who I do hikes with every summer, like you could ask them this. And like there was this one summer where it was after the New Hampshire summer where I was like talking their ear off. This is before I found you, of like, I don't know, I think I want to leave social media, but I don't know. Like there's no examples of it being done. Everyone's like, you're crazy. And then I found you and I was like, oh, there's like a concrete way to do this. And I think she's onto something. I think she's onto something. And then I like binged off the grid, specifically while like jogging this like lap at this lake near me. So like I always associate that lake now with off the grid. It's so funny. And I was just so inspired and I followed your advice. I made a plan. So November of last year, I announced I'm going to be leaving in March on my birthday. And I left myself like 4 months. And then I left. And that's how we got here.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that whole story. I think something that really stood out to me is your breadcrumb metaphor and is the ways that I think so many of us like. I mean, I love the starkness of your moment of like, I was looking at mountains and then I was looking at these tiny squares on my phone and like your eyes knew that something was wrong, even if you couldn't articulate it yet. Like what I love is I'm sure that your training in intuitive eating helps you notice these embodied cues, even if you're not quite making like intellectual sense of them yet, or you're not like changing behavior yet. Like that first breadcrumb is just the moment that your body noticed. I love that. How profound. Like, so that I think that's so profound.
And it really feels like looking back, like when you follow a path of breadcrumbs, like you don't know where it's taking you, but like you just kind of see the next thing in front of you. And then suddenly it's like, oh, it makes sense. Yes, I arrived on the brink of leaving Instagram.
I'm curious then, what happened after you left? Like, where does your journey go from there? Take us through like, the 12 months since you've been off Instagram, business wise.
So March 25th, my birthday, was like a super kind of anticlimactic day on Instagram. I think I got on and did one story and was like, because I set everything up before then. I did the 9 grid, like where's you can find all my stuff. I chatted about it for literally 4 months. People knew it was coming. I gave them all the opportunities to, subscribe to my newsletter, subscribe to my podcast, all the other places they could find me off the app. And so March 25th was like, all right, I'm going to do the thing I said and bye guys. And then from there, I started to implement some experiments. I think that's really where I started, which is kind of what I learned from you, and did things like made flyers with a QR code and posted them all over. Actually, in a very full circle moment today, right before, this call, I got an email, that someone had applied to my program. And one of the questions is, how did you find me? I have never had anyone find me from the flyer before that I know of. They could have found my website, listened to the podcast, but they haven't applied to work together. And someone was like, I found your flyer in this bakery in town that I could walk to from my house. Crazy. And they seem like a good applicant. Who knows? But just the point being, like, this stuff really takes time. I was defeated at first. I felt desperate. Like I felt desperate hanging flyers. That's what was coming up for me. And I really tried to lean into this idea of like, what would it look like to try all these different things and to not like judge myself about it. So I hung flyers. That's kind of sort of one of the first things I remember doing. I leaned into more like workshops to nurture people, some low cost workshops, some free workshops, some relationship marketing. That was something that really resonated from your work of like, how can I think about like sharing an audience with someone, or how can I think about doing some kind of collaboration with someone or newsletter swapping or whatever it is. I started to really focus on SEO for the first time, which was something I always just heard and was like, I don't have enough time to do SEO because I'm churning out Instagram posts, multiple times a week. And that felt like, oh, I don't have time to learn about that. And so I started really learning about that, doing research on like, what is my ideal client searching and how can I start intentionally creating content that will pop up on page 1 of Google when they search that. And all these things take time. Like SEO is known to take time. Flyers take time. Relationship marketing takes time if you're going to do it in like an authentic way. And so there was a kind of a lot of just like doing, but not seeing anything really come in. And there was, I still had clients coming in, but, maybe they found me from the podcast, maybe they found me from the intuitive eating directory, but it was a much slower trickle than was happening when I was on Instagram. And I really want to say that, like, I was so aware this whole time that correlation doesn't equal causation. So just because I left Instagram and my business slowed down doesn't mean my business slowed down because I left Instagram. Like, I kind of have this belief that things wouldn't have been all that different if I was on Instagram. I just would have been having this illusion of control that when like things were slow, I could get on stories and share the application link and share a compelling call to action. And yeah, it feels like what really would have been different was kind of just making myself more crazy, like checking views, checking all these like stats and stuff. And there was just more peace because I can't check how many people saw a flyer. Like the other things that I was doing were less directly measurable than Instagram is so measurable. So I don't know. I do kind of have that belief, and I'll never know. Maybe I would have had some more clients, but maybe it wouldn't have been as big of a difference. But I do kind of have this belief that like it was sort of the direction things were going in on social media anyway, and like maybe it was bound to be that way regardless. But either way, yeah, it was a slow year for me. It was a lot of planting seeds and not really seeing them sprout. And it led me to sort of rethink my business model. Up until that point, I had just a signature one-to-one offer that was like a 4-month long coaching container and an online course. Those are my two things, which is like classic, if you kind of come up in the online business world, like I feel like that kind of makes sense that you would have those two things. And I started to really rethink what that could look like. And I came to the decision to start accepting insurance, which was a big sort of mind fuck, if that's okay to say, to sort through because I had a lot of stories about like, oh, well, I couldn't make it in a private pay model. And like, am I successful? And what does that mean? And I also started to see some clients through a group practice in addition to my one-to-one clients to just keep myself afloat. And so there was a lot of like self-judgment that was coming up. But ultimately now I'm like about to start accepting insurance. Actually, it's a long process and it feels really good. I'm like, wow, I look back and I see the breadcrumbs that led me here. I see how it's not like you don't have to market at all with insurance, but there's ways of people finding you through their in-network panel that they get sent for their insurance options. And like that feels good to me to spend a little bit less time marketing. And okay, maybe that means spending more time learning how to bill and code and do insurance stuff, but I'm okay with that at this point.
Yeah, I, of course, really appreciate all these reflections. And I think just kind of paint the picture of your ecosystem from my perspective, having kind of worked with you in various ways throughout this year that you were leaving social media or have been off social media. I feel like when you left, you were already set up with a newsletter and a website and a podcast. So you had some very clear marketing channels that were perhaps like underdeveloped or underinvested in, but they existed. You weren't like starting them all from scratch when you left, which I think is so important, as anyone knows who listens to me. And because you listened to me, you knew how I felt about it. So you had those in place. And then you left and you took all of that energy that you'd been pouring into Instagram to like make your existing marketing channels more consistent and also like more strategic. Like you SEO optimized your website, you started doing more blog posts for your podcast and making sure your entire back catalog was there. You turned some of those podcast episodes into standalone blog posts that were even more SEO optimized. I remember kind of us thinking about ways to repurpose various content in different forms for you so that it could really like do the most work, including things that had happened on Instagram that you kind of pulled into podcast content or blog post content or newsletter content in different ways. So I feel like that was just so smart and strategic and has paid off for you over time. And then also you layered in the experiments like the flyers and like the workshops, and you did a lot of podcast pitching and you did cross-promotional things. And I feel like I really hear you on like it was slow. I absolutely cannot believe that you got an application the day we're recording this. I really feel like that is the universe being like, make sure you don't say on the podcast that flyers don't work because flyers work.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have even said that if it didn't happen. Like, so my partner used to own a home improvement company when we lived in New York. And when things were slow, he would get out and drop flyers. He would walk around, the area that he serviced and, you need a paint job, you need a power rod, whatever, here's a flyer. And what he said always really stuck with me, which is like, it's not the best marketing strategy. People don't like being, kind of like cold called or just like having papers left on their doorstep or whatever. But it does something for your energy of like, I'm getting after it. I'm getting out there. I'm going around thinking about places where my ideal client might be. I'm asking, do you have a community board? Can I put this up? And that's something that brings value in and of itself. Just like with Instagram, how I had to practice, my voice and presenting myself. It makes me have to get out into the world and bring my business into like the physical world, like a piece of paper. And I think that can be a useful thing when you're feeling kind of wonky energy-wise about your business. So I really hold on to that piece with the flyers too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think there is something like fundamentally different between getting out in the world and doing that versus like just the ramped up posting on Instagram, like pouring more time and energy into this app where everyone's already kind of going to waste their time and energy. And I think that I love how you kind of teased out how if you had still been on Instagram, that's what you would have been doing and obsessing over metrics and just more and more and more and more. And instead, you did more things, but they were like many things and you were seeing what works and you were in an experimental embodied, like, I'm going to go out in the world and signal to people that I'm available for this. And now a year later, you're starting to feel like it's almost like you threw a boomerang and you're like, oh, never coming back. And now it's starting to come back.
Yeah. It's like, I was coming back. I just had to go like halfway around the world.
Yeah.
And then I was going to find you again. Yeah. And I thank you for filling in the gaps of like, I didn't just be like, well, I'm going to make flyers. I had more consistent things like the podcast, the blog, the newsletter. I never miss a Monday with my newsletter. I love writing it. I've been consistent with the podcast too. So yeah, there were these more like stable things that I was more strategic about, plus the experiments layered in, as you said. And a big shift that I can see when I reflect back, it's coming up for me right now, is I really shifted to quality, not quantity, of like, I want to make the kind of blog post that somebody finds and they're like, thank God this exists. Like, thank God it's just in one place and she's got these clear headings and it's predicting all the questions I might have. I switched from a short form to long form and it's like, okay, that's what, and it's also interesting. I've seen that mirrored in my own, what I'm consuming. Like, I never really was into YouTube and now I love watching YouTube videos because I feel like I'm not trained on like the 30-second reel or a 1-minute reel or TikTok or whatever attention span anymore. So yeah, I've been thinking more about how can I make the things I'm already making really juicy and intentional. And also something I learned from you, which is like not being afraid to infuse my own POV and kind of just like do something a little bit more original, which I feel like Instagram really sort of shuttled me away from, because you just get to be more of the same when you're just around more people that are like you and doing that kind of work. So yeah, those are the themes that I want to add, is quality over quantity and like more focusing on more like of my unique perspective and not being afraid of like ruffling tail feathers in the process.
Yeah, exactly. I love that latter point because I do think that social media is really built as like a meme machine. Like, it is all about memification. So someone will do something, and then if it resonates at all, it's immediately replicated by hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of other people. And that is like what fuels social media content. And when you step out of that world, you can actually begin to connect with your own perspective and point of view again. And you can have, I think, more original or critical or like wide reaching or big picture or micro specific like points of view to share. And I also think when you step out of that like ocean of swimming in the memes of social media, like you can share your original point of view on your podcast where people have to put some effort in to listen and they're like going on that journey with you. And maybe if you'd share that on Instagram, somebody would have heard the first 30 seconds and like made a snap judgment about what you were saying and like blown up your comments, as opposed to on your podcast, you have the space to try to like talk through it and figure it out and say it well and do it in a different way. And it's going to people who are already like subscribed to you because they're interested in what you had to say, not just to like anybody who could pick it up off of their algorithm. And I think that it's so different, especially when you're trying to, again, like find your voice and get maybe not just like say something for the first time, but you're trying to really like up level your ability to speak and communicate and have interesting things to say. Like I can't imagine doing the level of work I do now on social media. Like I just don't think it would be possible for me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love that.
Okay, so if I was a listener right now, I would want to know a little bit more about what it means that your business slowed down. What did that mean? Like, did your clientele cut in half? Did you not make any money for a year? Like, yeah, what happened sort of like operationally in that way when you left your year off social media?
Yeah. So I will take us just kind of through, there's 4 full years I've been in business. My first year, I said to myself, if I can make the same amount that a clinical dietitian makes. So I used to be a clinical dietitian at a hospital in New York City. And I had like a year before those 4 years where I was like half in, half out, where I was, per diem at the hospital. I was also working at Trader Joe's, and I was starting to, do my Instagram thing and start to build a business. And I was like, how cool would it be if my first year in business, I could make this, something similar to the starting salary for a clinical dietitian in New York City. And I did that. And I actually made more than that. And then my second year, I made more than that. And my third year, I made a little less, but comparable. I also moved cross country and like had some stuff with dealing with my mental health in that year. So that's a part of the third year. The fourth year, which is this past year, which included the year that I left Instagram, I made pretty much half as much as I'd made at my height, at the highest I'd done. So certainly not nothing, but a significant hit that I really felt. And it was hard. And a hard part about it, interestingly, wasn't just the shift in less money coming in, but I love the work I do so much that I was just missing. I wanted to work with more clients. And I really felt that, which is ultimately what led me to be like, okay, well, taking insurance and, while I'm waiting for insurance to come through, seeing some clients part-time for a few hours a week in this group practice that accepts insurance, which is an easier way to immediately start seeing people through insurance because they're already paneled and I don't have to do the process of getting individually paneled. That's a way to fulfill this desire to do what I love and coach people on their relationship with food and body. And so, yeah, that was interesting to me that like, yeah, it sucks to make less money, but like what sucked more was like not getting to use this skill and really this gift that I feel I have as much because there weren't as many clients coming in.
I really appreciate the kind of two sides of this you're sharing, because I want to like affirm and name that like cutting your revenue in half sucks. Like that's not something that most people would willingly do. I wouldn't want to do that. Like it's a huge change. And also something that you have already said here and that we talked about many times last year is like correlation is not causation. Just because you left social media doesn't mean that that's what caused that. And in fact, like across the board, I've worked with multiple dietitians or nutritionists, and like private pay clients are just like dropping off and dropping off and dropping off. And I think as we went through the economic contraction, people went back to insurance and they were like, I already have this, so I'm going to go that route rather than paying myself for it. So in some ways, I think like, as you've already said, that's just like the broader trend. And it happened to coincide with your leaving social media, which for some people would be make them believe those two things were causal, when I don't think that's the whole picture, of course. And then also your reflection on like, it only reinforced how much you love the work you do feels so important to me, because it can be really easy when we're building a business on social media to start offering things because they seem popular or because other people are doing them, or like we feel like we should go that direction in our business. But the fact that leaving social media and then even having less business both brought you back to like, no, I love the work that I do. And I think that that's really a beautiful reminder. And what I've seen you do with these business changes, with working with a group practice that takes insurance, with working to get paneled with insurance, is now my perspective on this is like, you used to think your business was diversified because you had a one-on-one offering in a course. And you were like, cool, cool, cool. I've diversified my offerings and that will protect my business from these like economic shifts and swings and changes in the world. And now I just think you have actually diversified your business because you have three distinct revenue streams with like clients coming in from different places for each one. And I think that you already have such a more resilient business than you did before you left social media. And that can like only pay off over time, especially as we're seeing like even more economic contraction, even more stress, even more panic. Like how are you feeling about that heading into 2025?
No, I so agree. I did think my business was diversified because I had a course and a one-to-one offering, and now it's actually heading in the direction towards truly being diversified. Another thing that I realized is I really like working with specifically beginner intuitive eaters. So a lot of like common advice is like people who already bought from you are your best people, like alumni, alumni, alumni. And I was like bashing my head into the wall, being like, okay, alumni, I'll do an alumni thing and think about an alumni retreat or whatever. I have these people who are like singing my praises and, what do they call them? Like super fans or whatever. It feels kind of weird, but you know what I mean? And and then I had to get honest with myself and be like, no, I love taking someone from they don't even know what intuitive eating is to having this completely new relationship with food and body. Like, it's been described. Some people are like, think the veil lifting, like totally getting to expose them to that. And so part of that for me is like, okay, if that's what I want, and you and I spoke a lot about if that's what I want, then I have to pepper in more podcast episodes that are geared towards beginners and these types of things. But if that's what I want, then I need a bigger stream of people coming in because I feel like if I do my job well, I'll become obsolete to them. They have what they need. They have their intuition. I send them on their way. And so that's where insurance also came in of like, that aligns with this realization of the kind of sub niche within the niche that I like working with and giving myself an opportunity to have that kind of fresh turnover of new people who are new to this framework. So yeah, that was also a kind of a big discovery that I don't know that I would have had like the space or clarity on if I was still on Instagram that I realized in this year since stepping away.
Yeah, I think that's so important to name as well and really good for listeners to hear. And I think that the sort of like problem aware to solution aware journey that clients are on, and it's so different to talk to somebody who already knows what intuitive eating is and is looking for like a very specific type of practitioner. So for instance, you do a lot of work or you have a specialization in work around cannabis and intuitive eating. That's for a hyper specific person who's aware of intuitive eating, who is already thinking about their cannabis use and enjoyment and like looking for somebody who does that. That is so different than somebody who's like, I don't know how to eat without feeling like shit and like needs to discover intuitive eating altogether.
Yeah, this is a huge realization too in this last year of like all of my work was solution aware. So like the way I think of it is like symptom aware, problem aware, solution aware. Symptom aware is like, ugh, I feel gross in my body and like I keep eating past comfortable fullness. Problem aware is like, oh, I get it. I'm eating past comfortable fullness because I'm restricting. And solution aware is intuitive eating is the path out of this. Let me Google about intuitive eating. And all of my content prior to leaving Instagram, unless it was like by accident, but all of the content I was like intentionally thinking about was intuitive eating in this, intuitive eating in that, just like throw intuitive eating and then talk about like a sub part of it. But that was only ever speaking to solution aware people who are less at the beginning stage. And I like working with beginners. So it's not that like I didn't bring any beginner people in like, it as like a result of that, but it wasn't as strategic as it could have been.
Yeah. As we're talking through this, I'm just like, in your years since leaving social media, you just essentially did like a master's degree in marketing, I feel like.
Okay, so yeah, I feel like I actually like learned stuff about business. Like, because on Instagram, you're just throwing shit at the wall, but like, and you've talked about this in very early episodes of Off the Grid of like, it sort of like teaches you a lot of non-transferable skills, some transferable skills like showing up in your voice and your confidence. but a lot of non-transferable skills of like, I don't know.
How to edit a reel, which hashtag works better than which other hashtag. Those are the non-transferable skills.
And then I got off Instagram and was like, oh, but like at the end of all this, I am running a business. And I started like listening to business books and like, some of those you got to take with a grain of salt, but like, and thinking about like you and I talked a lot about strategically like naming podcast episodes, coming up with topics, and you have reflected back to me so kindly, like, yeah, I've seen you grow in this and that feels really good. So yeah, I do feel like leaving Instagram created extra time and energy and space to like learn more intentionally about marketing and business.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, I would say the same thing for me. Like, I feel like 4 years along on this journey, I know so much about marketing and business, and I have these skills, and I've gone to people, like I've learned about them in so many different ways, and I've applied them, and now I have practical experience with them. And when I was on Instagram, I was never learning anything except how to get better at Instagram. And that will always hit a wall because the algorithm will always shift, or your content will always like, you will no longer be the newcomer everyone wants to follow, or your audience will shift. Like, there will always be a wall there. But when you have the business skills, you can just use them in new and different ways and new and different applications and new and different businesses even. And yeah, I'm really, I guess I want to say like, I'm just grateful that you went to the school of Off the Grid and that we're here today to talk about it.
Yeah, I did. I really did. And I feel it. Like when I write my Monday newsletter, it's coming out with more ease. Like I'm like, yep, okay, like little anecdote, tie it in, give clear lessons. These things like, a while back I read Building a Story Brand, and I couldn't hold all the things I was learning and Instagram. And so now I dropped Instagram and I'm like, okay, I can integrate all these other things more seamlessly. And I feel it. I feel it in like how I'm thinking about making podcast episodes, blog posts, newsletters. It just feels like it's starting to kind of like click and synergistically like just supercharge. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Because when you're focused on being a business owner, you're making content always with the mindset of like providing value and inviting someone to buy something from you. And when you're making content for social media, it's always with the perspective of like pleasing the algorithm, getting more likes and engagement. And so you get good at that, which is a very different skill than getting good at making a sale. Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting this amazing conversation because if you're enjoying this episode, the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid hosted on Substack. It's where I share my monthly biz forecasts, bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many, many, many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And all of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun. And I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. I could talk to you about this part of business for forever, but I really also want to talk about diet culture and intuitive eating. And so, dear listener, this is where we're going to pivot a bit and maybe take like 15 or 20 minutes to talk about the many, many other sides of leaving social media and how the things that we do in our lives that help us connect with our intuition can also help us down this path or help us lead us toward this path. So one of the reasons I think like Leah and I quickly became like clients, friends, collaborators is because I had had my own journey of breaking up with diet culture many years ago when I did that work. And Leah had me on her podcast recently to talk about that experience and like how my journey of breaking up with diet culture, like I think directly led to me leaving social media, or I never would have been able to leave social media or break up with social media if I hadn't broken up with diet culture first. So I will link in the show notes a podcast conversation Leah and I had all about that, all about my story. I will also link a couple blog posts I've written walking back through my breakup with diet culture, if that's something you as a listener are interested in learning about. But since Leah is here right now, I want to ask her, Leah, I want to ask you, how do you see these things as intertwined? Like, did your intuitive eating path lead you to the path of leaving social media? Or did leaving social media maybe rely on skills you learned through intuitive eating? Can you kind of tell us how these things intertwined for you personally?
When you just said, did leaving diet culture lead to you leaving social media? My body was like, yes, 100%, 100%. And I'll share why. I think leaving diet culture and becoming an intuitive eater, which for reference, for me, that was about 10 years ago. So I've logged time practicing this skill. There's like a metaphor I like to say with intuitive eating, and that is you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Once you like squeeze out this like connection with your intuition, it's like there and it's out to play. And you can't like unknow what that feels like. And so your intuition starts to not just help you inform eating decisions and things about like how you want to move your body or when you want to rest or these more like nutrition, body image related things. But it's also like, hey, I have thoughts about other things too. And another way I like to frame this is becoming an intuitive eater and leaving diet culture for so many people is a moment when like the quality, your bar for like the quality of your life just goes up of like, whoa, I could have been feeling this free and like this peace all this time. Like, whoa, like what else can I feel better about? And I've seen this with clients. I spoke to someone this morning who was an older client, older meaning we worked together a few years ago. She went through a massive breakup and move after we worked together. And I'm not here to be like, that's because of solely intuitive eating. But I don't think it's a coincidence. Like once you clear a certain amount of stress that's occupying your mental real estate, you have the capacity to look more critically at other things in your life and to check in with, do those things feel aligned? So yeah, she went through not a breakup, a divorce and a huge move. I've had other clients do similar type things, change jobs, really big life changes. And so bringing that back to me, after discovering intuitive eating, I felt like since then, it was sort of just this like upward trajectory of feeling more and more in tune with my intuition and protective of like, I have to honor it. And if I don't, it's just going to keep, the whispers are going to become screams. And so with leaving social media, because I had that skill of like listening and my intuition was like out of the toothpaste tube, so to speak, it just kind of was there. And it was whispering and whispering and whispering until finally I was like, okay, I know what I have to do. And so I really do believe that I was able to do this because I was able to hear myself clearly, and not only hear myself, but trust myself. Because those are two separate and distinct actions. Like hearing, oh, this doesn't feel good. A lot of people could say that about a lot of things and social media, but trusting that it's safe to listen to this is a whole other skill. And it's one that diet culture really messes with us on, because if you're always outsourcing your eating decisions and your body decisions based on like, what does this app say? What does the clock say? What does the diet du jour say? Then your body goes like, oh, well, you don't care what I have to say. So like, I don't trust you. Like, I don't trust you to meet my needs. And so when you don't have that trust with your body, it's hard to trust the things that you're hearing, whether it's about food or like a life decision of like, this partner's not right, or like living here isn't really it, or, this business practice of being on social media isn't supporting you and in your mental health or whatever. So yeah, they absolutely feel connected to me.
I really love this distinction you're making between like hearing yourself and trusting yourself, because I think that so many people, like if someone has pressed play on this podcast, it's because you have at some point heard this voice in your body that is like, I don't like being on social media. Like at most basic, it's just like, I don't enjoy this. And a lot of people don't trust that feeling or don't take it seriously enough to let it lead them off of social media. And I understand that. It's scary. It's a big change. It may not feel, or you may not believe, or when you think through it, you're like, this is not strategic. This is not possible. But I love how you're talking about like intuitive eating is a path. It's something you can work with a dietitian like Leah to learn. You can go on this journey. It takes time to build these distinct skills of hearing yourself, trusting yourself. And then like changing your behavior as a result of that, right, is also a huge part of this. And I think that I can relate so much to the ways that hearing that voice, believing and trusting our intuition, and then changing our behavior as a result, like changes every aspect of our lives. It ripples out so much. For me, it started with actually, if I think of even before I broke up with diet culture, it really started with changing how I was dating and then meeting my partner, who's now my spouse. And like we had a very different relationship than the ones I had been in before that. And that was like an active co-construction. And then like that really helped me trust myself more, which helped me stop dieting and over-exercising, which is what I call my breakup with diet culture. And then that eventually helped me leave social media, even when everybody said that made no sense. Like I believed it made sense for me. And all of that starts with like being in touch with yourself. And I think this is so important. And I really am so happy you're here to talk about it, because for me, like the decision to leave with social media has to start with that voice inside of you. Like, as I say often, I'm not here to convince anyone to leave social media. You need to desire it and be motivated to do it. And then we can work on a strategy around it.
Because then when or if you have a slower time or you're in business, your why is there. You're like, this is deeper than just, I just left because I felt like it's the trend of what people are doing or whatever. It's like, no, this was fundamentally conflicting with my mental health or my value system. And when you have a strong why, it's easier to keep going when things feel like they're not going well.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you have left social media for reasons that don't even make sense or feel right to you, and then your revenue cuts in half, you're probably not going to stay off of it. And that's fine. Like if you didn't really need to leave social media to begin with, okay, you go back. Like a lot of people listening to this probably have done that. But I think that there's just so much here in this conversation and every conversation I'm trying to have in my life lately that's about like not forcing ourselves to do things we don't want to do, not overriding our intuition. And I think that intuitive eating is such a beautiful practice to begin going on that journey. Also, because there are trained practitioners who will support you with it, and you eat many times a day. So you have to practice a lot.
It's a muscle. I think about when most of my clients have spent decades in diet culture, like jumping from thing to thing. And all of those years that you're outsourcing your eating decisions, the muscle of going inwards and figuring out what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat is becoming weaker because you're not using it. And the muscle of outsourcing, you're getting really good at following rules and following times of days and whatever protocols. So if you decide to leave diet culture and connect with your body and use your own innate wisdom to govern your eating decisions, it's like a weak little muscle at first. And you drop in and you're like, I don't know I don't hear anything in there. Like it's crickets. I don't know how to make sense of what I'm hearing. And the way I see this is like practicing intuitive living is like cross-training for intuitive eating. And it's something I encourage clients to do. So I think about like if you were a swimmer, which I'm not, but for whatever reason, this metaphor just makes sense to me. Your coach would probably have you do like land workouts to cross-train and enhance your performance in the water. Similarly, with intuitive eating, if we can practice dropping into our body and accessing our inner wisdom for other things in life besides just eating decisions. So like does social media feel right? Does this person feel right? Do they make me contract? Do they make me expand? Then that muscle can get stronger and stronger. And when we go to make eating decisions, it's like, yeah, this is reflexive because I'm sort of just living this way.
And I feel like that perfectly parallels what you were saying or what we were saying about you like going to business school in the year since you've been off social media, right? It's like all you knew was Instagram. And so you were just kind of outsourcing what to do based on the things you saw on Instagram. And then when you left, you like built all of these marketing skills. And now, like at the end of last year, I told you, like, you don't need me. I'm happy to chat with you as like a peer and friend, but like you don't need me to tell you what to do or to give you ideas of things to try because you've built that muscle of being like, okay, this is how I like to do a workshop series. I know how to do this now. Or this is the moment I need an influx of people. Here's my options for bringing those people in. Or here's something I'm going to try because I have some extra time this month and I think it's a long-term payoff. So let's put it in right now. Like you've learned how to do this. My favorite metaphor for this is gardening, right? Like it's something that over time you work with the soil, you work with the weather, like you learn when to plant the seed, you learn how much water it needs. But I think that like starting with ourselves and our bodies, where we're like working with our intuition, is just a foundation that we need before we can begin working with like the material world around us in a garden or a business. Like if you don't have that ability to hear yourself and trust yourself, it's really hard to do that work out in the world. And that I think intuitive eating is like one path that can take us there.
It's a path. And like you said, it's a path that we can naturally get a lot of practice with because we have to eat multiple times a day, every single day. So it's just one way in to that frequency that we're so not encouraged in sort of modern life to use. It's like, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But like, if we're overworked enough, busy enough, stressed enough, wanting all of the things that like capitalism makes us want, then like we don't have time to hear that like kind of small, quiet voice within us that's like, hey, this is what would feel good for you. So you have to practice. You have to practice.
Yeah, you do. And also because like diet culture doesn't go away because you break up with it, right? Like just because I talk about breaking up with diet culture or breaking up with social media, like diet culture still shapes the landscape that I live in. Social media still very much shapes the marketing landscape that I operate within. But I personally have chosen to change my behaviors around those things. And I think that's just like such an important site of the work. We build that resilience and that ability to stay with ourselves in those experiences. And I think that this has been really supportive and helpful, even just for me to see even more parallels between breaking up with diet culture and breaking up with social media and how like cultivating this relationship with our intuition is foundational for all of that work.
I think they both really come down to a values alignment moment where like in diet culture, a lot of my clients are able to be like, yeah, it's not aligned with my values to operate by these ideas that like being smaller is better, eating clean makes you morally superior. They're able to say that and then actually starting to rewire their neural pathways around like, what if there isn't a hierarchy of like smaller bodies or better bodies, or like what if food is morally neutral and like you're not a better person if you're like eating a salad versus a burger and these types of things. And then it starts to like lead them more towards like, yeah, that does feel more true to like, I don't want to be like judging a person for these types of things. And then with leaving social media, a lot of people leave social media because of a values misalignment of like, it doesn't feel aligned to be, I mean, this is like can be so many different reasons. For me, it wasn't so much even about the like meta / like gross humans who are like behind it all. I mean, of course that was in the soup, but what was more the driving factor for me is like my value of taking care of my mental health. And it was at odds with that. And so both of these feel like an opportunity to shift into living through your values. And I was listening to you and Taylor on your podcast together, and you said something like just kind of noticing how people don't want to be like inconvenienced to make changes that are more in alignment with their values. And yeah, both of these things are like kind of inconvenient. Leaving diet culture, you're going to be swimming upstream. It's going to be hard. It's not the like path of least resistance, at least at first. And same thing with leaving social media. I mean, probably depending on like where you're at. But yeah, those are just a couple more parallels that I see in the mix.
Yeah, I feel like this whole conversation, the first half slash two thirds slash three fourths about your business, and also this piece about intuitive eating has really just all been a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions are not the ones that are the easiest or most comfortable or have the most like immediately successful results. But if we are connected to our deeper values and our intuition, we can do what's true for us. And I think that to me, like that's what success is. Like I have a business so that I can empower myself in my own life in a certain extent, even when I'm swimming upstream. So I can make these choices, so I can do what I want each day, so I can have control of my schedule. Like all of it comes back to that, like wanting to be in alignment with myself and wanting to feel free of these systems to the extent that one can in an individual or even communal life lived within the systems.
Yeah, and of course you have talked about this on the podcast before, just defining success for yourself. Just knowing that going in of like, this is what I want from this, and then being able to be like after like, yep, that's what happened from this according to my definition of success. And I actually feel like last year, in terms of like why I have a business and all those things, was my most successful year in business. I feel that my anxiety was the lowest it's been. My like connection and presence with my partner and our kitties and like cooking and just like my hobbies and my friends, all of those things were like at an all-time high. And so, yeah, like that's success.
Hmm. Snaps for that. I love this so much. So beautiful. What a perfect note to end on, that you had your most successful year in business, even if certain metrics or other people may see it very differently. We can measure success through our relationships, through our mental health in all of these ways. It does not only come down to a revenue number or a follower count or a number of subscribers or any of those things. I think that's always so important to center. And I really appreciate the whole journey that you've taken us on today, Leah. If folks want to connect with you, particularly, I will say, if you're a person who is listening to this and you're a little bit like, what even is intuitive eating? If you're curious about that, Leah has a ton of great resources, but I will let her tell you, like, Leah, how can folks connect with you and stay in touch?
Totally. So I have a podcast. Amelia's going to link to our episode. It's called Shoulders Down. So if you're listening, you're probably a podcast person. So that makes sense for you. And then if you're like, what is intuitive eating? The best thing that I think you can start with is this intuitive eating starter kit that I made. And that's a free resource that I will give Amelia the link to the landing page for that.
Beautiful. Okay, we will have all of that in the show notes, as well as just Leah's general website and places to learn more about her course, her other programs, and her newsletter so you can know what's coming up for her. Thank you, listeners, so much for tuning into this episode. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I hope that it encourages you to start or continue the journey of connecting with your intuition, of expanding your business and marketing skills in ways that feel aligned with your values, and of finding your own definition of success. And Leah and I are definitely cheering you on, and we hope to hear from you soon if you want to reach out. So that's it for this episode. We will be back soon with more episodes of season 6 of Off the Grid. But until then, I will see you off the grid. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away.